in Miami.
Where were you last week?
I was in Orlando. Yeah, I was in Orlando. I had some meetings to attend. And I was telling him how I'm fine.
Pleasure.
I had to rush. I couldn't get the words. I just got on the phone, but I had to like listen in. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that as Billy said, you were attending by because they had all the stuff up there. There's no way for anyone to know that, so she said.
Oh, I didn't want to miss it.
Jesse.
Francine.
Nice to meet you.
Jesse. Oh, this is cute. Is this ours? Oh. Cute. What is this? This is so cute.
Because we put our feet up as it gets a little longer. Hi. Very good, thank you. How have you been? All right.
Hi, how are you? Good to be here.
It's happening. Hello.
How are you?
Sorry, I'm late. I got more people here tonight.
Yeah. It's a momentum. I don't know if that's good or
I know, I know.
Isabella, should we get going here? Got everybody here?
And it's so funny to see the drawing of straws. Actually, it's like,
That's what I was doing.
that's really what we want to say. I mean, why don't we just play rock, paper, scissors? The winner of rock, paper, scissors shall be determined.
Yeah. I saw that. I'm like thinking, real.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? All right. Good, yes.
You open us up or you want me to? Yeah, okay. All right. I'll even use my gavel. How's that? I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's the December 12, 2022 Charter Review Committee meeting. And we'll open up with a moment of silence and then the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll have the roll call.
Mr. LaCapra? Here. Mr. Bell? Here. Ms. Steelman?
Here.
Mr. O'Hara?
Here.
Mr. Valinsky?
Here.
And Mr. Quinton?
Here.
You have quorum.
Okay, we'll have some public comment. Anybody like to have a comment? Please come to the podium.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to say how appreciative I am of your service on this committee and what a tight timetable you have and how you're giving up your Monday evenings through the holiday season to make that timetable work. I'm so thankful to each and every one of you that are here serving. And I want to let you know that I have great confidence in this group. I'm so pleased that all of you were willing to serve. One of the things I wanted to mention, I had made some notes before the committee started meeting, and this is my first chance to get here to tell you just a couple of small things that I wanted to emphasize. One is that I spent some time reviewing the Palmetto Bay Charter, which I understand you've already gone over, because I knew it was such a recent charter that, and I found that section 1.4, the powers dealing with the residency requirement, and says that the person who is running for office shall be a resident for 2 years preceding their qualifying date. That's, I believe, a point of emphasis that would be important for the charter review. The other section was called affiliations. Each person running for elected office shall run independently of any other village candidate. And I don't know if you recall, but we did have a slate of 3 candidates, 3 on one postcard. It appeared to be an affiliation, and it was troubling because there was nothing in the charter that would allow for or disallow that. The other thing that I noted, and I think it's an important one, is the section on alienability and power to sell or lease land use for public purposes. I believe this should take into account municipally owned parking areas here in the village. These are known to act as buffers for adjacent single-family homes. So thank you for listening, and really appreciate your time, and good luck getting through all of your material. I appreciate it.
I'm Tony McCormick, and I'm at 353 Grand Concourse. And I'm really encouraged that Alex brought to light the parking, because maybe beknownst to you, maybe unbeknownst to you, but we have a council that's doing an amendment to the comprehensive plan, and they have introduced a new zone called mixed use. I have gone online, and I've got Dania Beach Comprehensive Plan. I've got the Coral Gables Comprehensive Plan. I've got the Fort Lauderdale Comprehensive Plan, and I've gone a little further. And we're the only one who's implemented a mixed use. And I wondered if, on their plan, they're showing that what now are parking lots, and I counted the cars today, and there are 90 parking places, most of them all filled, maybe 1 or 2 missing behind the Dunkin' Donuts. There's 70 some odd behind the Bank of America, and there were 16 free, and so forth and so on. But we have a lot of used parking, and in their plan, they're talking about the parking lots, building apartments. Where are the people going to park? So I don't see that they're taking account into parking. they're not, we've ended up in a situation where I really love our method of electing people, but we have a council that can do things and do nothing but listen. They listen for hours to the public comment. 90% of it says, please don't increase the density and put apartments downtown. And we don't have any means of interacting with them, or hearing what they think, and or even the assets of said plan. So that's my report, and it goes with her parking, because most of the area that's in the comprehensive plan, mixed use, which is the only questionable real thing that's going to devastate Miami Shores, is in the parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. And next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Any comments or moving to accept?
Yeah, I mean, the minutes are fine. That the board rights would be coming back to discussion of this meeting, but it's not on the agenda. So I would just request that instead of say next meeting, maybe at a subsequent meeting, it's not fine.
I'm sorry, through the chair, if we could speak into the mic, it's hard to hear.
Certainly. No, I had just a friendly suggested amendment. It had indicated that the Bill of Rights would come back for discussion at the next meeting, meaning this one. And I just asked that it could be changed from next to a subsequent meeting.
Through the chair, I don't think we can amend it to reflect that, since it was stated that it was going to be heard at this meeting. I just think that the way that the information was presented to me by the legal department indicated the 3 additional topics. So we are going to discuss Bill of Rights and the elections in addition to those 3 other topics that was mentioned at the last meeting.
Right. So
But I'm fine with the language.
so if you look at the minutes, the very last part, it references the next meeting topics. We're going to start back with elections, then bills of rights. This is the last page of the minutes, because these were things that, as you know, Michael, we didn't finish. There were still a couple issues left, and so my intention when we get into the substance of our meeting would be to go back to elections, and I think the minutes kind of lay out what issues we had talked about and what issues were kind of still out there. Bill of Rights, as you say, is another one that we had a lot of conversation, so we're going to bring it back today, after we get a chance to look at it. So.
Right. No, I'm actually, I was fine with the minutes. I just didn't see it on the agenda, so I thought, but I get it now. And with that, I'll gladly move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, minutes shall pass. So the next item on our agenda, discussion and possible action items, and 6A, as you know, we had added certain topics to what we were going to discuss, which are laid out here: general powers and duties under village council, eligibility, terms and composition, mayor, powers, duties, election, and then compensation, expenses, prohibition. So those, and then the following was raised by Michael, sales and lease of municipal property, and then raised, I think, by Jesse, was a neighborhood protection. So these were items that we had asked our village council to take a look at certain aspects of that. But my intention would be, based on, as outlined in our minutes, that we would go back to the items that we had significant discussion on, which was elections, bills of rights, and then I think we were a little bit in the village council, but go back to those and see if we can wrap those up, hopefully, and then move into the general powers and duties and whatnot, which we've got some good materials that were sent to us at the end of last week. So what I'd like to do is open up the discussion regarding elections. And as I recall, the primary item that we were concerned about had to do with the runoff election. And Isabelli had identified that the ordinance, as we know, just simply says runoff elections shall be held if necessary. And several years back, there was actually a need for a runoff election, and there were some concerns that when would that be necessary? And perhaps we should add to that provision simply to give more understanding in terms of, when there's a runoff election, tie vote, is a tie vote what causes a runoff election? So that was one issue on elections that we touched on. I think the other issue that we touched on with elections, and Council Member Alice Birch brought that up in terms of qualifications. Currently, our charter says you only have to be a resident for 6 months in order to run for council, and there was some discussion about should it be more than that. Isabelli reminded us that in order to be on a board or committee like we're on, there's a requirement to be a resident for 1 full year. Yet for a council member, it's only 6 months. And so I think those two items were items that we talked about. I think they were kind of left open. If I'm missing something on the election side, let me know. But
Mr. Chair, and I think for guidance purposes, we did prepare a PowerPoint this evening to guide this discussion in the same manner as we did at the last meeting. And so the intention was to start off with election, and I think you gave a good recap of where we did leave off. And so we've discussed and worked with Isabelli and prepared some language that would address both determining when a runoff is to occur and also the process for it. And so if you like, we could start the presentation, and so we can start with elections and then move forward to Bill of Rights. But it's your preference and how you'd like to format tonight's meeting.
Well, that's fine with me. If you want to go ahead with your PowerPoint on those issues, why don't you go ahead and do that, and that'll give us a background that we can use to go forward.
Sure. And I'll defer to Mitch I know you're in person, so if you'd like to begin at least.
No. Gustavo, if you can load the PowerPoint. I think it's behind the screen, yeah.
All right. Okay. So elections, we wanted to talk about municipal qualifications, including residency requirements and runoff election language. And then village council powers and authority, sales and lease of municipal property, neighborhood protection language. So in terms of qualifications, we have a couple of examples here of other, is it here? Because I can't read that. A couple of examples from Palmetto Bay and from Surfside, as Councilwoman pointed out in her public comments. Palmetto Bay has apparently a 2-year residency requirement, as well as citizenship requirements and all the things that are already required by law. And then you can see for Surfside a 1-year requirement. So either of those would be appropriate. I would say most places that we represent have the 1-year requirement. I've heard of the 2-year requirement. I've heard of a couple of times that those have been challenged. I don't recall whether those challenges have been successful or not, but the courts have said that any sort of residency requirement, anything like that, has to have a rational basis, obviously. But the general trend in the law is that restrictions on eligibility are looked upon with disfavor, so they have to be reasonable restrictions. I think that given the overall, you know, the overall trend, I have never seen one that was more than 2 years. You like me to move on, or do you want to talk about residency requirement?
We can, why don't we talk about it while we're on it, so there's other questions. So, any committee member have any thoughts on this residency requirement? Mr. Bierman's given us some background, anything from 1 year, 2 years. I think that some of the charters we saw didn't have any residency requirement. So it looks like there's kind of a blend. Give me your input.
And one more thing, Mr. Chair, I think there's what also was brought up from the last meeting was the distinction, I believe, between board members' residency requirements in the village versus council members. So there was a distinction between the two. And so I think that should also be discussed, should be considered in your discussion tonight.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that we would definitely want to, I would propose that we look to change the 6 months to at least a minimum 1 year. We even look at the different roles on our council members, mayor maybe being 2 years actually, and just other council members, vice or below being 1 year. I was thinking about it from our last meeting, maybe potentially why there's some other towns or cities or villages that don't have a requirement. They may have been newer in terms of when they were founded in the 90s or the early 2000s, they were still having a large wave of houses being built in other, we're more mature here in terms of these are houses in our village. I think that might be a big reason why for that, but at least a minimum of 1 year requirement for at least all members. And again, if not, 2 years for the mayor.
Mr. Chair, I think it's very hard to rationalize the inconsistency between the committee requirements and the council requirements. So I think 1 year is a no-brainer. I would even support 2 years if people were behind that on the committee. Yeah, that's my opinion.
I would support an overall 2 years as well.
I agree that consistency is important, and I think there should be across the board same year amount. So if it would be on an advisory committee or on the board, it should be the same amount of time. And I'm perfectly comfortable with supporting 2 years. But I mean, I would support 1, but you know, I'm okay with 2 as well.
And I'm supportive of 1 or 2, but I think it should be consistent on both.
Mr. Chair, what we're saying consistent, I don't think, are the charter, I'm sorry, are the committee requirements, that's not in the, is that in the charter as well?
I don't believe the committee requirements are in the charter. I think, is that an
So,
ordinance?
so consistency isn't really on the table unless we want 1 year. From what we can do here. Is that correct? If we have clarification. Yeah.
I think we can charter being the foundational guidelines for all. I would defer to Ms. Wood and Mr. Bierman.
So are we also proposing meddling with the committee requirements one shot here?
My thought on
So,
that.
but the committee, and through the chair, the committee requirements is in your code of ordinances. And I think when you're speaking of consistency, there's no legal inconsistency. Rather, it's preference. That's more of a policy decision, whether you want your board members or your committee members to have a certain residency requirement versus your council members. So if consistency is more so a policy decision in this scenario. But the code, if you want to, the advisory members now resident requirements is higher. So there will be no change that will be needed in the code of ordinances if you're trying to amend the charter to reflect what the current requirement is for your advisory board members.
I think what we're saying is if we were to make it 2 years to be a council member, and we wanted it to be consistent with the committees, and we put that into the charter, can we do that? What happens to the ordinance that says you need 1 year? Is it just supersede that, or are we in a conflict? Can we not do that?
So if the charter only speaks upon council members, so that's the only thing that you would be changing. It would be whether it wouldn't make a difference for what your board members are required per the code.
Yeah,
One doesn't necessarily affect the other, if that makes sense.
Also, I think board members, advisory board members, committee members, to me, those things might change a little bit. So I think it's appropriate to leave that as an ordinance that's addressed by our council. I think the number of years that a council member has to be a resident, I think is something more substantial, seeing that the council is basically our highest governing body. So the committee members is not really on the table for us right now. And I don't think we should now try to plug it into the charter. I think we need to make a decision on the council members' residency. My only thought would be, are we going to lose out on some good potential council members if we go to 2 years? I think 1 year means they've been around long enough to at least be through an election where they're not part of the election. 2 years, obviously, I think the anticipation is they've got a better understanding of how our village runs and maybe be better qualified. So I think 6 months is way too short. 1 year or 2 years, I would probably go with the 1 year. I think that they're going to be a council. They're going to be residents for through at least one cycle of hopefully of an election or around long enough to understand how our government's run. So,
Mr. Chair, yeah, I agree. I was actually only asking because it seemed like there was an appetite for 2 years, and also at the same time that people wanted it to be consistent. But I agree with you, especially when it comes to the committees, because some of these committees are very hard to fill. A lot of them benefit from special knowledge, specialties, and I think it would be, a tragedy in some cases if somebody who had a special skill set that would be useful to a certain committee couldn't do it because they weren't here for 2 years. So, yeah.
Could I make a motion to change the residency requirement to a minimum of 1 year for the council?
is there a second?
Second.
All right. Discussion.
Can we do 18 months? 1 year I still think is very young. 1 year, a time of announcing candidacy maybe, or some additional terms attached to it. I think 1 year is, you're still getting your paint dry on your house at that time, so understand, but we have a lot of qualified people in our village, I think.
Any other thoughts on the 1 year, 2 year?
I also think that if somebody it's unpaid, it's public service on a volunteer basis. I think that if somebody wants to do it, I can tell you that I've just hit the 2 year mark being here. The first year, I learned a lot about the village from all of the permit applications, and I think it helped me be better informed before I did this. But I'm also fine with changing it.
I'm open.
I like the 2 year requirement only because now, I'd have to admit that I've been here for 20 plus years. So there's that bias. I feel like if you've been here for about 2 years, you're committed to the community, as opposed to, not that we have people who are transient, but I just think that you have a better understanding of the committee, of the community, and a commitment to the community. But I'm open to, I'm not opposed to 1 year. I would just prefer a 2 year residency requirement.
Nobody else who hasn't spoken? Yeah. I think Mr. Bell makes a good point about them being paid only $1 and all that stuff. However, there is another trend going on here since I moved here 13 years ago, when nobody really spent any money on these elections, versus now where substantial money is being raised and spent on these campaigns, I think, you know, we could probably benefit from maybe a 2-year. I'm leaning 2-year.
I'm with Francine at the moment. I'll support the 1 year, but I could go higher. So I don't know if we want to take the 1 year and then, Judson, if you want to go and make a second motion to go to 18, I think we could get there. I don't know what the feeling is here, but
I could amend, I don't mind amending mine to make it 2 years. I feel like 18 months is like a weird number.
It is very weird, I agree. I prefer 2, I'm trying to get you to 2, I get 18, I get 2.
But I am willing to amend
if you want to,
my motion to make it 2 years.
and I'll second the
Okay,
amended
so,
motion again.
so Michael amends his motion to residency being 2 years.
Second the
That amended motion has a second. Any more discussion?
I'm for 2 years also. I would support either one, but I don't think it's certainly not unreasonable to expect somebody to be here 2 years before.
Mr.
the
Chair, if I may,
council.
before we take a vote, I would just maybe like to ask the lawyers, because they made a brief reference to there being some challenges to 2 years, and if maybe just what that's about. And
Well, you know, there are various challenges that come up occasionally to any of the qualifications requirements and people being disqualified. And they don't come up unless somebody gets disqualified, right? You say, you know, somebody registers and then somebody raises the issue of their residency and they're disqualified, and then the person sues and says that qualification is unreasonable. I don't know of a case in which a 2-year residency requirement was held to be unreasonable. It's just on my mind because sometimes these are challenged. I would say that you can. I feel safe that you can go with 2 years. I feel safer with 1 year because I know 1 year has been upheld specifically. What I was going to suggest is that you put a little bit more meat on the bones than what you have in the charter, and actually be more specific the way that the Palmetto Bay provision reads, if you're going to do it. Now, you don't have separate districts, so you don't have to adopt that part, but they include that you have to be a qualified elector, meaning that, you have to be old enough to vote, among other things. You have to be eligible to vote in an election in Florida in order to qualify. The other thing, though, I wanted to point you to is at the end, sometimes cities have difficulty attracting people to run or to serve or to find somebody who can be appointed. And if the residency requirement cannot be waived under any circumstances, you could wind up with a vacancy in which there really isn't anyone who's qualified. So you may want to leave yourself room to, in the event that somebody needs to be appointed and you can't find anybody willing who meets the requirements, to only in that case waive the requirement down to 1 year, let's say, something like that. And we can draft that language for you. With respect to the earlier comments, and maybe it's no longer on the table, in my experience, if you have a charter provision that restricts who can serve on appointed boards, you wind up with the problem that I just mentioned, which is you can't find anyone because it's too restrictive. And I've seen that in Miami Beach, where somebody resigns from the planning board and the person has to be an architect. And then nobody wants to do that, because if they're on the planning board, they disqualify themselves from ever submitting plans for anyone. And so they can't, and when the planning board requires 6 votes out of 7, you have to get unanimity. And if somebody doesn't show up, a lot of applications can't go through. So I think it's better to leave the council the flexibility on who to appoint to voluntary advisory boards and deal exclusively with the qualifications for elected office in this. But I do recommend that you go with something a little bit more substantial along the lines of what was in Palmetto Bay.
Let me do this. So we have a motion for two-year residency. I've now been swayed to the 2-year as well. So unless there's any more discussion on going to the 2-year residency, seeing no more discussion, All in favor of the motion that the residency to be a council member goes to 2 years, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Excuse me. Sorry, Shanae. As of right now, that particular section 23 reads, any person who has been a resident of Miami Shores Village for 6 months, who registers in the procedural manner prescribed by general law and the ordinances of Miami Shores Village, and who has qualified as an elector of the state, shall be qualified elector of Miami Shores Village. So you do have to be qualified elector in order, in addition to
Right.
the 2 years.
Okay, so as you all are going through your PowerPoint, move on.
So we've gone through elections. Oh, we're on runoff elections. Right. So I think that what you suggested last time was that the charter clarified that in the event of a tie for any seat, there will be a runoff election. And so one of the things that the language in paragraph 3 there is something that we have in some of the other charters of the cities that we represent that allows for a tiebreaker. Now, there could be a situation where there's actually a 3-way tie. And so the reason that it's drafted that way is in the event there's a 3-way tie, you need to make a decision as to who can be in the runoff. And then if you have a tie in a runoff, you need a tiebreaker. And so that's where we suggest the drawing of straws, which is in almost every charter, there is a tiebreaker at the end. You can't have endless runoffs between 2 people. Once you've had one runoff, if there's a tie, you break it through some random way. We like straws better than coin flip because a coin only has 2 sides. And again, if there were a 3-way tie, you can use straws. Use an unlimited number of straws to break an unlimited tie.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading your proposal, and my experience has only been one tie, and then there was a runoff for those 2 positions. And I can't, my personal thought, I can't imagine anybody being comfortable with drawing straws as to who's going to be a council member. And so I don't really like that language. I mean, obviously the odds of there being a tie are very remote. We've had one tie. And if there were, if he just went with the language on paragraph 2, let's say there was a 3-way tie, very unlikely, but possible, then a runoff election shall be held in the same manner and form as the general municipal election. So you would have a runoff for those 3. I mean, would we have to put in here that of that one runoff, whoever gets the most takes that position, or is that just understood? Now, is it possible that the runoff, there's another tie? You know, very unlikely, but if that were to happen, then you have another election. I mean, I don't think that's going to ever happen, but I really, like I said, I'm uncomfortable with just the language in our charter that talks about drawing of straws, because I think our village takes these council elections very seriously. And not that drawing straws is unserious, but it just seems like it's not the way to conclude a runoff.
To the extent it's included in other charters, it's obviously a last resort in the very unusual situation in which there would be a tie. I will say that as a smaller municipality, you have a higher chance of having a tie because you know typically your elections are decided by can be decided by less than 50 votes, and you get closer and closer to a potential tie in that case. But you're correct that it's a rare occurrence when there's a tie, but there could be a 3-way tie in which you have to decide which 2 candidates would go into a runoff.
Why wouldn't you have all 3 candidates going?
Well, you can, but generally a runoff is a head-to-head contest between 2 candidates.
So I think what our concern was is there was no language. It just said, runoff elections shall be held if necessary. So we're looking to add some clarity.
All right, so we would just say, in the event of a tie between two or more candidates, a runoff election shall be held with the highest vote getter being declared the winner. Right. Typically, it's 2 to 4 weeks after the election. And luckily, your election is not a November election, so it's easier for the Department of Elections to do that. But they have, one of the things that I've learned recently from another city that we represent is that the Department of Elections functions independently of our charter. And so our charter can say a certain number of days, and the Department of Elections says, we can't do it. So, yeah, it's by, yeah, as they say, we work by agreement, not by right. So we have to, deal with that. But yes, it would be to the best of our ability to have the election within
Any
2
other
weeks
comments
thereafter.
on this, Michael?
I'd be okay with adopting change that we have up here in number 2 and just leaving 3 off. So I'm okay with just including the language, runoff elections will be held for candidates who receive a tie vote. A runoff election shall be held in the same manner and form as a general municipal election. I think it corrects the issue that the ad hoc committee identified, and I think it just gives some clarity to the issue that was raised by the clerk. Yes, that'll be a motion.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I agree with Mr. Griffith. I can't imagine that it costs more money to put, if we're already doing the election, you put 3 names on there instead of 2, it's seems like a no-brainer.
I'd leave it, yeah.
So I did reach out to the Elections Department as a result of the last discussion. I think Mr. O'Hara specifically asked who sets those dates, and it's my office. And when I went back to the history, it's just something that's never been outlined in the charter. And so prior to my appointment, it was 2 weeks following the municipal general election. And then after I started, I realized that in actuality, that's not enough time logistically for the Elections Department to have everything ready and then to advertise. And then the less time a voter has the ballot in their hand, that's not good. So I typically will schedule it 3 to 4 weeks. Right now, knock on wood, I don't know who it is, but not looking forward to a runoff election in 2023, but the date that has been set is May. So we had the election in April 11th. I think it's the first Tuesday in May. And so that would be about 3 to 4 weeks in between the election. But you can have information or language in the charter that specifies when. And that way it's clear for future municipal clerks, and there's no confusion or.
But if we have something in the charter, you're saying the Elections Department may not necessarily follow timing wise, or will they? I mean, I got the impression that they have their own rules on when they do things.
Prefer 3 to 4 weeks. And then I asked them the question that Mr. O'Hara asked, well, what if you have to change it? What if something happens and we can't have it that day? And they said, well, then that's subject to the county supervisor of elections discretion, because now she's looking at logistics. Is there another election that she's working on with her team? And so at that point, we would be subject to having to wait until she determines when it would be a proper time for us to change that date to.
Could we also consider, just instead of having a time certain, not to exceed 6 weeks, not to exceed 8 weeks, so that there's wiggle room within it? Throwing that out there.
I mean, I think those things are best left to the clerk and to the council to determine when they set out the calendar of the election and the runoff. And it's just better for the charter to just be super clear. Here's the runoff, and you follow the clerk, their direction. So That's kind of my thoughts.
Let me ask this, I agree with that, I agree with that point. Where it says a runoff election shall be held in the same manner and form as the general municipal election. To me, that sounds reasonable. But you're much more involved in these, the logistics of it. It is the same manner and form as the general municipal election. Is that makes sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion to go with just paragraph 2, and leave it as is and keep it simple, as I said. Any more discussion on that? All right, and there has been a second. So all in favor of adding paragraph 2 regarding runoff elections as set out in the motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed? Motion passes.
If I may, the PowerPoint is out of order, so if we can skip to the last slide on neighborhood protection, because the next discussion should be Bill of Rights.
All right, so Ms. Wood, I'm not, so you have some more of your PowerPoint to go through? I think the next topic we're going to touch on that we're trying to finish up from last meeting was
Is
the
is
Bill of Rights.
right. Yeah, the Bill of Rights is the next topic, and if we can just skip the slide to the neighborhood protection slide. I don't know who's controlling the.
No,
No,
Citizen Bill of Rights.
I believe I don't believe we have a slide for the Citizen Bill of Rights, but last time you had the discussion last week about whether you felt that you needed to incorporate the Citizens Bill of Rights. I had advised that essentially the county has a Citizens Bill of Rights, which the Commission on Ethics has deemed applies within the cities, so that, you know, things like the right to be heard and the right to notice and things like that, the rights to receive records, are all already applicable to residents of the village. However, most of the municipalities that we represent have basically the same Citizens Bill of Rights as what's provided in the county charter as part of their municipal charters. And I think the discussion was whether you wish to do that to reemphasize to the community that these rights are available to them and are applicable to them and to this municipality.
I guess one of the questions I have is, given what you said, so there are some examples. I'm looking at the Miami-Dade Citizens Bill of Rights, and I was going through them, and almost all of them will say every person has the right to transact business with the county and the municipality. So it directly says, I mean, and the municipality. So, you know, as council said, you know, it covers municipalities like Miami Shores. There's a handful. I'm looking at number 10, for example. It's number 10 in the Miami-Dade County Citizens Bill of Rights. There it's mayors, city managers, attorneys' reports. So that one, it directs the county mayor, the county attorney. Now it says, and each city manager and city attorney. There they use the word city instead of municipality. Would that be, would something like that cover Miami Shores?
Yes.
I mean, there's also some, you know, number 14, regional offices. I mean, obviously, Miami Shores isn't going to have to set up regional offices. There's some, for example, number 11, talking about budgeting, and that one seems to not apply to a municipality, but rather the county mayor shall prepare a budget. So some of these, it seems that they would only apply, and they're specific things that would only, you know, apply to the county. So I don't know, I mean, if some of those have to be you know, would it be prudent for Miami Shores to have it? I mean, my understanding is, you know, in terms of budgeting, you know, and the village manager can speak to this, but you already have to do all this budgeting work, and you present budgets, and the council looks at budgets. So this might not add anything more than what you're already doing in terms of putting together a village budget. You've already got responsibilities for that.
Correct. And typically, that's one of the
Oh, all right. And typically, that's one of the things that municipal managers are called to do, whether it's city or town or village.
So, I mean,
Budgeting is already required by statute.
yeah.
The Truth in Millage Act, Florida law requires that the budget be published in advance, that there be public notice, that there be 2 public meetings, et cetera, which you already comply with.
Let me ask you, based on your experience, so why do you think that if it's budgeting is already required by statute, and even municipalities like Miami Shores, they've already got in place, you know, budgeting requirements and procedures. Why do you think they have something like that in the Bill of Rights?
I think the idea, at least at the county level, was that they required a certain amount of reporting that they consider to be more than what the Truth in Millage Act requires, a higher level, and the reporting of it, and publishing of it to the public. You know, the cities that, almost all the cities that have a Citizens Bill of Rights have that language as well.
Any other thoughts or discussion?
Well, both you, Mr. Chair, and the Vice Chair were on that advisory committee. I mean, I admit that this wasn't even on my radar until I read the report from that committee. And I don't know if you can get behind the thinking of that as a recommendation, because, I mean, when I heard about it, I thought it was a pretty cool thing to have, but the committee probably deliberated on that.
I think, and Michael can add to supplement my comments, one of the things that the advisory committee was looking at some of these different charters and saying, wow, you know, this particular thing seems to be in a lot of them. So therefore, the Charter Review Committee should take a look and see, you know, is it something that would be right for Miami Shores or not? So my response is that we weren't necessarily recommending that it be adopted, but rather recommending that it be looked at.
And just to piggyback off of that and to the discussion that we had, you know, at the last meeting, that it wasn't abundantly clear that the county's Bill of Rights really applied to the residents of Miami Shores, and we've subsequently found out that it does, but some of the wording makes you wonder how would it apply to Miami Shores Village when they're talking about the county mayor and things of that sort, of the county manager. I think we should make a recommendation to include a Bill of Rights. I think it's very important. It's the second piece after the preamble, which just kind of says this is your charter. It sets the tone for the village and for the charter going forward. And I think it's just very important to enumerate what the rights and responsibilities of you know, the residents and council people would be. So I'm all for including the language, even though the county one applies. I think it'd be very important to include it in the Shores Charter.
I would agree with that as well, and going to my example with students was, we adopted it basically with the board. Things about the county's responsibilities, simply within like the first person, the village, the town.
Right.
There are going to be some parts that you're not going to want to include. The county's has a provision 14 on regional offices. You obviously, in a small town, you don't need regional offices. So we'll make those edits. And I think that, you know, Miami Lakes is a good example. Pinecrest is a good example of a smaller municipality that has Citizens Bill of Rights that's been adapted for that municipality.
I have a question for council. So I also noticed the section on remedies for violations. I'm looking at Miami Lakes right now. They've got it. obviously it's in the Miami-Dade Bill of Rights. I'm always a little hesitant to put something in place that might provide opportunity for somebody to sue Miami Shores Village. But give me your thoughts on, I mean, I think one of the sample ones we had, maybe it's Palmetto Bay. I didn't see that in Palmetto Bay's charter, their Bill of Rights. So they didn't have the remedies for violations. Miami Lakes did. Of course, there's a provision for it in Miami-Dade County. I guess a couple of things. One is, it says in there that okay, so first, a citizen may bring a cause of action alleging, I'm reading from Miami-Dade's section C, a violation of this article filed in the Miami-Dade, in the Dade County Circuit Court pursuant to its general equity jurisdiction. And if successful, shall be entitled to recover costs as fixed by the court. Does that include attorney's fees?
Generally, that word costs is not interpreted to include attorney's fees unless it says attorney's fees. So there are types of cases where you can recover court costs, but you don't recover your attorney's fees. I would be clear about it if you don't, if you don't want to have attorney's fees included, and that, obviously can be substantial.
I guess, even if we don't have a remedies for violations section in Miami Shores, could a citizen still
Yes,
pull from this one? And
I think so.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Because
Because most of these are enforceable against the village already.
Mr. Chair, in terms of the remedies, I do sort of agree with your thinking on that. I feel like Bill of Rights should be something that's a positive thing as opposed to the punitive piece. So, just some thought if we were adopting one.
I think part of our discussion last week was, I think the kind of the split was, does it give Miami Shores anything more, any more protection by having one? I think the general answer was no, not really. And so therefore there was a thought, well then why put it in there? There was a second school of thought that was discussed that, this is maybe a best practice kind of thing, because so many of them have that. And is it something that our residents would feel, that they've got, not necessarily they understand, oh, we've got more protections, but rather, it's a clear thing. So I think those were some of the factors. But if there's more discussion, I think we kicked that around pretty well last week. And I think we've got some clarity that it basically doesn't provide any more legal protection, but is there some reason for the benefit of our residents to actually have one right in the Miami Shores charter?
I mean, my
Yeah.
only thought after hearing the attorney was that it sounds like a lot of the language that's in the Miami-Dade County one is not really consistent for our little village.
I think for clarity and for, the general knowledge of the residents, that they understand, how the charter is supposed to work and what their rights are. I think why wouldn't we want to just put it out there yet again? I wouldn't see it. I don't have a reason why we wouldn't include it.
Mr. Chair, just going to state that my opinion hasn't changed. I haven't heard anything to make it change. I'm here and I got involved to try to actually do stuff that has an effect. And as far as I can tell, this doesn't. And I don't really want to put, I hate to say I don't want to put any work into it if it doesn't do anything. We're wasting time on this kind of, but if you guys want to do it, it's fine, whatever. But
Well, I think that this is a motion that can be voted up or down, and I respect the decision of the committee. I think there are differences of opinion here, and I respect those, but at the end of the day, it's a vote.
So, Michael, you're going to make a motion. Let's say so.
I didn't know there was a string attached to that comment, but yeah, I'll make a
Well,
motion.
what I was going to say is for the Bill of Rights to be added as amended by council to fit Miami Shores. In other words, some of these things in the county charter that, like, for example, regional offices, I mean, we're not going to have that, so. I'm just asking for clarification. I'm not trying to mess with your motion.
No. I haven't really made a motion, but I mean, Ms. Steelman's going to opine, but I feel like until we see the revised language, we shouldn't be voting on anything other than perhaps asking council to bring back language that would be applicable for us to consider.
That's fair enough.
I agree.
So I'll motion that if that even needs a motion.
I have one question, and this is for council. If we don't put remedies for violations in our Bill of Rights, does that open us up? I mean, do the remedies for violations sort of limit the recovery that a citizen could have? Or, because I'm concerned about putting a Bill of Rights and not having any remedies, because then if they sue, is it remedies as determined by a court?
Well, if you know, in the county language, it looks to me like the remedies are as determined by the court. I mean, it doesn't limit the remedies, in other words. It doesn't say shall be limited to a payment of no more than $1,000 or something like that. So the remedies aren't really limited. I think what you find with the Citizens Bill of Rights is that most people, when they have a concern about a violation, will go to the Commission on Ethics. And the Commission on Ethics will make a decision. Typically, it's a Solomonic decision, literally, where they're cutting the baby in half. They're not there to do anything harsh, but they may make a finding that that a place is in violation of the Citizens Bill of Rights. I've actually never seen one, but I think most of these are adjudicated there, including municipal Citizens Bill of Rights issues. I recently had one there where someone had raised an issue. It wasn't even a formal complaint. They just sought advice, and Commission on Ethics provided advice and clarification.
We have a motion pending.
I'll second Michael's motion.
Yeah.
And the motion is to have council draft a Citizens Bill of Rights that you believe would fit Miami Shores and bring that back to us.
I mean, it may be best to just put jurisdiction within the Commission on Ethics and not mention, an action in court. That may be the best solution for you. That like Color Bay, where I sit, it has no remedies. They have additional provisions, though, that are specific to Color Bay. So if you want something during our Christmas break, you may want to take a look at Color Bay and see if you find that fits you better.
So the motion made by Michael, seconded, to have council put together a Bill of Rights that they feel would appropriately fit Miami Shores to be brought back to the committee to review and make a final decision. All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
All opposed?
No, respectfully.
One? Okay, Bill and Jesse. All right.
Would you like to move on to sale and lease of municipal property?
Let me see,
Oh, Village Council, sorry. not Village Council.
yeah, I think the next one we had was Village Council.
Okay, so Village Council. All right, so your charter is silent. I think, as you pointed out last time, that you select the mayor through a customary practice of the council deciding who's going to be the mayor, which is fine. Or you could have a separate election for mayor, which is what other communities do. Or you could determine that the highest vote getter in an election in which the mayor's seat is vacant would become mayor. You don't have the powers of the mayor enumerated in any way. And those vary a lot from town to town. This is a strong council form of government, meaning that the mayor is just a council member. It's not a separate office, and that the mayor is essentially the chair of the council. In some jurisdictions, that comes with a few additional duties, such as nominating the town manager, or just nominations subject to ratification by the entire body, nominating the town attorney, subject to ratification, representing the town as its representative in intergovernmental relations. In other words, in any official action needed, that the mayor would either be the representative or would appoint the representative. Those are the types of duties that a mayor typically has in a strong council form of government. So if you wanted to enumerate the powers of mayor, you could. The powers of the council itself, some charters do mention that, but Florida law is very broad in the powers of the council, and they're specifically laid out, the powers of municipal council, in Chapter 166. So it may not be necessary for your charter to repeat that unless you want to specify any additional things that maybe aren't mentioned in Florida law. But Florida law 166 has a catch-all, which basically says that the council can do anything that's not preempted by other laws. And I think that that's probably broad enough to cover everything. But you might want to have something specific in terms of the mayor. And I think you were deciding last time that you might have something in the charter as to how the mayor is selected. Again, if the custom is sufficient and you don't want to specify that, you don't have to.
So, yeah, so we were looking at, I think, focusing on section 27 of our current charter. That is brief. It says, at the first meeting of the newly elected council after each election, the council shall elect one of its members mayor, and then in effect goes into powers of the mayor who shall preside at meetings of the council and shall be recognized as the head of the village government for all ceremonial purposes and by the governor for purposes of military law. So we had looked at that, and we'd had discussion about the charter currently does identify how someone becomes mayor, that the new council elects the mayor. And then, so there is a provision as to who becomes mayor. The other discussion was what has been the practice. Well, the practice is the council does in fact vote on mayor, but the practice has been that whoever is the highest vote getter, the council votes in as mayor, and whoever is the second highest vote getter, the council votes in as vice mayor. So I think our discussion was do we mess with this or just leave it the way it is? One of the points that was raised is you might have someone highly qualified who gets the most votes, but says, you know what, I don't want to have to, be the figurehead. I want to be on council, but I don't want to be the mayor. Well, then that council has the ability and the flexibility to say, okay, then Mr. The person with the second votes, would you be mayor? Yes. So it gave some flexibility in the process. At the same time, the charter is not silent as to how the mayor is selected. So I think we kind of left off on that after a lot of good discussion. My position would be to leave it as it is and not make any changes. But would anyone else have any other discussion or thoughts?
I actually thought we had decided what you said, but if we need to affirm it.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm, I believe last meeting, the consensus was to leave that in as is. And then as we work through today's topic, it was just to, if we could, I don't know if we could go back to the last slide, Mitch. Before. The opposite direction.
I don't think I'm actually controlling it.
Oh, it was someone else controlling
Someone
it?
else has control of it.
Can we go back?
We want to go back to the village council slide with the number of seats.
Beforehand.
I don't, there it is. Okay.
That one more before. There we go. Here we go. So just to give you guys an overview of what's currently in your charter, this slide was, we wanted to orient you in terms of the number of council members. And so at our original meeting, our first meeting, I believe it was Francine brought up a point and wanted direction from us in regards to whether or not there is a correlation between the number of council members and population. And so when we get to the next slide, you'll see that some research that we pulled in regards to that. And we pulled a few population sizes and included also what was in the ad hoc committee's recommendation from the 2019 population size. And you'll see not much has changed between 2019 and 2021. Most municipalities that's around that same population size, which is about 11,000 or so residents, a little over that, all have 5 members as council members. So I'm not sure if that is, if there's some correlation, but nonetheless, we at least want you to provide you with that information if you decide to make any changes in that regard. There's in terms of your powers and duties, as Mitch was, referring to other charters, others include a little bit more than what we have currently. The charter is silent. And then as far as the powers and duties of the village council, again, the language isn't very robust. And then there, of course, language regarding term limits and then filling of vacancies. And so these are all things that we just wanted to bring to your attention, and we provided you with materials in case there were areas that you wanted to revise while we're here. And so I'll just pause there. And if you want to start with maybe the first topic that Ms. Stillman brought up, which was the number of council members, we could, as a point of discussion.
I'll just point out that the city of Miami, which is the second largest municipality in the state of Florida at nearly 500,000 people, has a board of 5 members. So
But this was good information.
Yeah.
We're right on point.
5 seems to be the number one number for municipalities of almost any size. Some have 7, a few have 9. That's a lot to manage.
Art, is there, and in terms of these topics we're looking at for village council, any other in the list of things that Ms. Wood had identified, possibilities, anything else that anybody wants to bring up on this topic, now that we've got some of the information from them?
Isabella, if we can just make clear in the minutes that we discussed the tradition of selecting the mayor and the vice mayor, and it was the consensus to not make a change. I think that's very important. So the residents know that we did review that, and the consensus was not to take action, rather than someone saying we didn't even look at that.
Good point.
So noted.
Also, would it make sense for us to look, now that actually happened to us, we'll have a vacancy council members in next week. So that clause is actually very timely for us. So imagine us not having a vacancy and having to fill that. And basically states, if I remember correctly, we can back up 2 slides of the last slide we were on. It says that the council members are able to choose a qualified individual. I don't remember the other words, but it should be helpful to find that further. We'll be happy with that. Now that this is actually something that's happening, how we feel about that, what would we actually want to see?
As a hypothetical, because whatever we decide won't impact that, right? Because, yeah.
I can't say, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just stating that it could happen on a recurrent basis, but it's something that we can feel.
Yeah, but the one happening, the resignation next week, we're stuck, yeah.
It's happened before. People have moved down to the shores and created a vacancy. And so it's happened before. And I mean, my experience has been that the current provision where a majority of the council appoints a qualified person, meaning someone would have to have 2 years of residency and whatnot. That has seemed to work to fill the position till the end of that person's term. It seemed to work well. So I don't know that it's good to take a look at it. It's not one of the provisions where I would say, yeah, we really need to fill in some gaps on this, but I think it covers what's needed. So,
Mr. Chairman, the issue that council member Burke brought up earlier regarding slated candidates. He was talking about earlier, outside money that had come in the last few elections. Is that something that the charter would be involved with or talked about or?
yeah, I think that's
I mean, the partisan, non-partisan nature of elections, is that addressed? I
not specifically in Miami Shores charter, but I do know I saw it in some of the other charters. I'm looking to see how the language was handled. I think it just said it's a nonpartisan election, but I think one of the things that Council Member Bursch, she also used the term affiliation, independently, running. So, and she referenced Palmetto Bay. I don't recall seeing that section, but I think it's when it was mentioned, it certainly seemed like something that worth us taking a look at.
Through the chair, Mr. Chair, if I may, I do want to just bring to your attention on the vacancy section. I know it is something that is relevant in the village at the moment, considering Councilwoman for St. Fleur's announcement at the last meeting. And so while we're here, I think I do want to bring to your attention there is language in a number of other charters that does provide a little bit more guidance in terms of when the remaining council members will select a new council member. And so there's some language that would refer to whether it's 60 days prior to an election, or if it's 1 year, if it's like 6 months into the term or a year into the term, there are language that could guide when the council appoints. And so while this subject is relevant at the moment, I just wanted to bring that to your attention. If it's sufficient as is, and I know that has been the theme for our committee as a whole in these last couple of meetings. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, but by no means am I suggesting that you need to make a change at all.
So, and I'm looking at, I don't know if this is a specific provision that Councilwoman Birch was referring to. This is in the Palmetto Bay under their Article 5 elections. It says nonpartisan elections, all elections for the council, in this case, they say vice mayor, shall be conducted on a nonpartisan basis. The ballot nor any campaign literature shall show the party designation of any candidate. Nonpartisan office means an office for which a candidate is prohibited from campaigning or qualifying for election or retention in office based on party affiliation.
What's the page number on that?
14.
Thank you.
So, yeah, Village of Palmetto Bay, page 14 there at the bottom.
Mr. Chair, also in the same charter, under section 2.3, elections in terms of office, number D, it says affiliations. Each person running for elected office shall run independently of any other village candidate. I think that might be what she was.
2.3, you say?
Yep. And it's
Yes, I think that's what you
D.
were referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, because yes, you referenced the term affiliation. Each person running for elected office shall run independently of any of the other village candidates. Personally, I think both of those are worth us taking a good hard look at. Yeah.
I agree.
You want to propose some language first, she got to us, or do you want to?
Why don't, so, I don't know, can the chair make a motion? I got admonished one time for doing that, so.
Mr. Chair, I move that we ask the lawyers to whip up some language relating to candidates not having affiliations with each other and being nonpartisan.
Let me ask the council, so if we were interested in, and they seem to go hand in hand, at least from kind of my perspective, the nonpartisan elections, I mean, it's not that long, you can just be a short provision, but also the affiliations. If we were to have those two kind of within the elections section, would there typically be some kind of enforcement language or remedies language, or is it just, there's always already a Miami-Dade system to handle something like that?
What I've seen with elections is the candidates tend to challenge each other. That's usually how it comes about. Typically, the clerk and the attorneys, we don't want to be in the position of disqualifying somebody, So when we're asked, typically we say, if somebody feels that there's a violation of some elections rule, they should go and sue in court to stop it or address it, and not, we typically try to avoid being the ones to make a decision as to whether somebody's in violation or somebody's not qualified or something like that. The clerk's going to look at the papers to make sure the person, swears whatever they have to swear and has opened the account and all of that they have to do. But beyond that, typically we don't say, oh, well, it doesn't look like you've lived in the town long enough, or you've committed a violation because you put you put blue on your flyers, and that means that you're trying to identify yourself as a Democrat or something like that. We don't do that. So yes, you can put the fines in there, but the court's going to fashion whatever relief the court sees, which could be disqualifying a candidate. It could be telling them they have to stop using the party affiliation, or a group of candidates have to stop trying to run as a slate. That one seems more difficult to enforce. The party affiliation, most people just observe.
Now, as you had mentioned, there's a commission on ethics or something. I mean, if you wanted some kind of, like, let's say there was an election going on in Miami Shores and some people are running as a slate, and we have this in our charter, could just a resident take this to the commission on ethics?
Florida Commission on Elections, Florida Elections Commission.
Okay, and would that commission have the power to stop?
Yes, and they have the power to fine people.
I think that's rather than trying to put some kind of something in our charter where our village has to be responsible. There's already enforcement, committees and whatnot in place, and it sounds like that would be the way. If the resident had this issue, they could get a resolution.
So is that the sense of this committee, that we don't include specific enforcement provisions? We just include
my thought would be
the prohibition.
Not have a specific enforcement provision in our charter, but rather based on what you said, if we have a prohibition for affiliations and partisan elections, if we have a prohibition and someone's violating it, then either a resident or whoever could then bring it before the Florida Commission on Ethics, and they have the power to do something. So rather than trying to put that remedy in our charter, I would just simply put the prohibitions in there. The prohibition for affiliations and the prohibition for partisan elections.
Mr. Chair, I agree. I think if the alternative would be like actually having Miami Shores itself be like in the middle of it. I think that's a terrible idea. You know, what if you have like an incumbent running against, you know, it's better to have a third party, you know, deal with it, I think.
Was Jesse's motion seconded?
What's that?
Was his motion?
Yeah, I was going to do a point of order, but I want to. I move that we ask the attorneys to present us with some language prohibiting affiliations and party affiliations for candidates in our council elections.
Mr. Chairman, can we
and-
add the,
Can you add affiliations, so it's nonpartisan and affiliations? Both those two items?
Yeah, nonpartisan and affiliations.
can we add the language referencing the Florida Commission?
We'll look into that because we want to make sure they will accept jurisdiction of something like
Yeah,
that.
okay.
But
I'll
I believe it's
second
within their
Jesse's.
jurisdiction.
Okay, is that a second?
That's a second.
Okay, so Jesse's made a motion, Michael's seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
And I just wanted to note also that for the candidate oath, it's a nonpartisan office candidate oath. It's stated on there. And so when they do fill this form out and take the oath, it does say, I am a candidate for the nonpartisan office of council member. So just so you know, and that's pursuant to Florida Statute 99.021 sub 1 sub A.
What,
Yes, that's required by the state of Florida.
I want to point out, though, that there is a trend now with town elections, county elections for the national parties to support particular candidates. And so sometimes without the candidate necessarily cooperating with the national party or a union sends out a card with a list of candidates that they support and whatever they're, you know, any of the different organizations will do that, and those may provide information about the person's party affiliation. And you know, there are PACs that are involved. It probably doesn't reach the shores, but even in other towns like Coral Gables, you're starting to see that.
Mr. Chair, yeah, so that's very interesting because in my head, I'm thinking like, you know, like what's to stop some third-party organization from saying, I endorse these 3 people that are running for council. And even though the 3 people are not saying it, you've effectively got the exact same thing, you know? So how is that?
That's what makes
this
it
has no teeth.
That's what makes it difficult to
Right.
enforce because you have third-party electioneering committees that, you know, they're not supposed to be cooperating with candidates, but they may do things on candidates' behalf without them.
So what we're really limiting with this is just
The
like
candidates
explicit
yes.
candidate participating.
The
and
candidates
saying,
themselves should not be putting out flyers that say, you know, we 3 are running together, or, you know, that we're Democrats and we want you know, if you're a Democrat, you'll support your fellow Democrat.
Gotcha.
Okay, we'll look forward to getting your work on this one.
Well, I think that the language is going to be the simple language that's already been described, which is that the elections will be nonpartisan and candidates shall run independently of each other.
All right, I think we're ready to move on to the sale of land. The disposition of land issue that was added to our list of things we were going to look at. So on our actual agenda, we're down to sales and lease of municipal property. I don't know whether you all have a specific, I know we got material in our packet here of some examples.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to check on, because I'm certainly ready to move to that, but on the 6A, the discussion and possible action regarding the following topics, you know, we also, on that list is the powers, duties of the mayor. We already dealt with the election piece, the compensation, expenses, and prohibitions, which I don't think we've talked about any of those. I mean, we can stay all night, but I don't mind if we kick the can forward. It's just some of those items were not covered.
That's, we had in our, the first meeting in our, just kind of a general outline, we had, those were topics that were kind of on the list. So that's a good point. So let's touch on that. Is there, anything within our, Miami Shores charter regarding, well, powers, duties, elections? I think we touched on some of those, but the other one we were looking at was compensation or expenses, prohibitions. On those topics, is there any discussion or issue that any committee member wants to raise and discuss?
It's not really that I have a position on it, but when I was looking at some of the other smaller municipalities, I was surprised how many of them do provide some very minimal compensation for their council persons, whereas we do not. They're all blending together in my head now. There's, in terms of reimbursement of expenses, there was one village or municipality that just sort of gave a blanket $400 a month for expenses rather than having people turn in receipts. But, the whole concept, and I'm not in politics, the whole concept of compensation for the position, like I said, I haven't really given it much thought other than the fact that there's a lot of municipalities out there that do compensate for service.
Let me ask Isabelli and village manager, is there currently in place, whether it's a rule or just a practice, where a council member can seek some kind of reimbursement for something that's some expense incurred while doing something outside of just sitting on the council bench? Does that happen? And if so, is there some kind of, is there anything in writing that addresses that?
It would have to be addressed through the budget. So for the most part, the only expense that's reimbursed to elected officials are educational expenses. They get up to $1,000 per year for additional educational, professional development expenses. And as far as I know, that's the only type of expense associated with that. Travel related to that, even though we also provide travel-related expenses, conference registration, that sort of.
Would those be paid based on a request? So they would submit a request saying, hey, I had to go to Orlando for a Florida City of Leagues meeting on behalf of Miami Shores, and here's my hotel bill and my gas bill?
So my office prepares a village council budget every year. And so I try to estimate, I don't know for future council, but I do estimate one conference per council member, also membership expenses for the Miami-Dade County League of Cities, the Florida League of Cities. And so they'll let me know that they're interested in attending a conference, and then I'll register, I'll book the hotel, and sometimes they'll do it with their own credit card, and then they'll let me know. I'll work through the manager's team, the finance department, to issue a check for reimbursement. But that's usually handled through the budget, and my office develops a budget for their travel expenses and membership subscriptions.
And since the final say on the budget before it goes to the council to be voted on really rests under within my portfolio. For example, those funds are paid out of the general funds, and there can be flexibility with that based upon the provisions I have as the village manager.
Thank you for that. My experience has been that if they're, consistent with what you just said, that if there is a council member that does something specific for Miami Shores, then there's a mechanism to have the Shores cover those particular expenses in place.
Mr. Chair, couldn't they just pass an ordinance like approving if they want to spend money on something, a field trip or whatever, like if it really comes down to it, they could.
I mean, I don't think we need to do anything with our charter on this issue.
I agree. I think where my head is at is I would rather keep any variables that change out of the charter so that we avoid having to meddle with it, you know, any time in the future. If we put something like compensation in there, which obviously is gonna have to change over time, we're inviting like, you know, ourselves to, I think that's probably something better dealt with outside of the charter, if any changes are getting made at all.
Any other comments or questions regarding these last items under village council, the powers, duties, elections, compensation, expenses, or prohibitions?
I just want to know what we're referring to with prohibitions, because if it's something that we should look at.
I think where that came from was this municipal charter outline we received.
Okay.
That's the wording.
Word,
on this.
okay.
Yeah.
Because
not-
I couldn't find,
Yeah, it's nothing specific that's in our charter or necessarily pointed out in another charter. It's just part of the general
okay,
outline of issues.
that explains it then. Okay, thank you.
Well, let me ask about compensation. I'm looking at the Miami Lakes one, which is the one you talked about, Michael, that the $400 a month allocation.
Right.
They're not compensated, but there's an allocation for it, and it's just reimbursed. Any expenses are reimbursed that amount, against that amount. But is it reasonable for us to, I mean, I'm just thinking, but is it reasonable to think that our council shouldn't be paid anything, or at least not have, well, let me ask this. Is there a budget, I think you might have said, is there a budget set aside that if they have reimbursable expenses, that's where it comes from, so they're not out of pocket? So that's probably the same thing that they're doing in Miami Lakes. Okay.
Let's say that you go to, let's say not necessarily some event, something that's maybe not on the radar, without the percent, and then we heard a partner speak, maybe that we take things of that nature, or a meeting that comes up, or we want this a meeting that's in one of those planned monthly legal citizens.
And I'm sorry, just to be clear, so like, what does the bureaucracy look like to get reimbursed for that? Just, they come to they give the receipt to the village manager or the clerk? Okay, and that just like is gonna show up as an item in the budget? Gotcha. All right, cool, yeah, that's.
Reimbursement, say a particular council member wants to host town halls, and specifically their town hall, that's something that would have to go before council for discussion in terms of reimbursement, even though it's in the manager's threshold. It's something that if that person wanted funding to be allocated for that particular purpose, to Mr. Valinsky's point, that would be either through a resolution, perhaps, for instance, the one that was established for professional development outside of the regular conference, they're allocated 1,000 per council member for additional professional development. That the vehicle that was used to have that in place was a resolution. So that resolution would go before council. So if there's an additional expense for reimbursement outside of travel and professional development, then that would have to go before council for a vote. Even though I would say it's well within the manager's spending threshold.
Okay.
And I may need some help from council on this one, on the prohibitions, because I found it in Palmetto Bay, and I don't know if it's in ours or not, and if it is, then that's great. It starts at the bottom of page 11 on Palmetto Bay. The prohibitions that they listed are that neither the council nor its individual members shall dictate the appointment or removal of village employees who are under the village manager. It deals with interference with administration, and it deals with the prohibition about holding other offices. And if these are already in our charter, then that's great. And if they're not, do any of them need to be?
I did not see that. What you point out, those are very common in municipal charters, particularly the one about non-interference with the manager. I didn't see that in here, but that is something that is typically found in
What page was that again?
charters.
It starts at the bottom of page 11 on the Palmetto Bay I'm not,
I don't think we have that.
I don't think
I
we
don't
do
remember
either.
seeing it.
I believe there's a provision of Florida law that covers similar ground, which I can bring back for you if I can find that. But that is typical in charters because, you know, I guess at one time there was a lot of patronage, and rather than, you know, and once we started having professional managers rather than a strong mayor, the cities didn't want the council members saying, you have to hire my nephew, or, you know, something along those lines. But more importantly, they didn't want council members going to, say, the head of code enforcement and saying, hey, you're giving my neighbor a hard time, lay off, or I'm going to have you fired. And so that's the origin of that particular prohibition. And I've seen actually cases where managers you know, raise that in court against council members. Not that anything like that would ever happen here, but those types of provisions make it, give them, you know, if the manager's having an issue with a council member going around the manager to talk to a particular, you know, to the police or something and try to push some particular result, then the manager can, you know, always go back to the charter and say, you know, this has to go through me.
So are you recommending that we have something like that?
I'm not,
'Cause
I'm
I
not,
don't see it anywhere.
I'm
It's
not
not in the
recommending
statute.
that,
There's
but
no
I'm just
prohibition.
pointing out what it means and what
I
its
think we should
purpose
talk
is.
about it. I think it's something that we don't have it, but
Maybe we're not ready this evening to talk about it. I know
Right.
that I'm kind of flipping through pages.
right. But it's worth discussing.
Yeah.
Should we specifically defer it for next time, or go ahead and talk about it
I
now?
think I feel better prepared if I looked at it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so why don't we, so we'll defer on the prohibitions and specifically a review of the Palmetto Bay prohibitions, and it'll also give us time to look at some of the other charters to see if there's some other prohibitions.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Michael.
All right, so now are we ready to move on to sales and lease of municipal property? Council will give you the floor here to give us the overview.
Well, I think it was brought up that some of the members have wanted to explore whether you would want to require voter approval for dispositions of municipal property. That type of provision varies. The one that's sort of the most well-known is City of Miami Beach, which actually is not quite as broad. It's very broad, but it's not as broad as the language, the proposed language there. Something that you may want to consider in limiting leases is maybe limiting leases of longer than a certain period, so that there's no confusion, so that somebody, you know, having a temporary lease of a parking lot to run some event that is blessed by the village council would be able to do that without going to the voters. You know, in Miami Beach, it's leases of particular properties of longer than 10 years would require voter approval. The leases of, and then they have certain properties that they name that require a higher level of voter approval because they concern the convention center. So most of them require 50% plus one, but in the case of the convention center parking lot, it requires 60%. And they're all limited, though, to leases of more than 10 years or permanent disposition. You should also be aware that unless you're exempted, the Miami-Dade County Charter Article 6, or Article 7, I guess it is now, applies within the village, which limits the ability of the village to grant any commercial leases or concessions or otherwise dispose of a municipal park without voter approval. So there's already a county protection that applies to parks, but if you want to apply to parking lots, municipal buildings, or any other real property, you would need to add that. And I would suggest that you at least consider the length of leases that you are requiring an election for. Because a short-term lease, typically, that would be a lot to go through for a short-term lease.
You're the expert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is something that I brought up at that ad hoc committee, and thank you for allowing me to put it on the agenda for discussion. So a couple of things that you talked about. Sale of parks are prohibited. Golf course, Miami Shores Golf Course, not considered a park. So that could be sold outside of that requirement. Every once in a while, we hear about potential sales of the country club portions of the golf course. We heard tonight from Alice Birch, potential sale of parking lots. And regarding the leasing, parking lot for, a party or something, you could do a use agreement, you can do a license agreement. It doesn't have to be a lease agreement. So I think, I modeled it off of Miami Beach. I'm sure you saw that. Just make it very simple. It's vague for a purpose, but it's just the sale, exchange, conveyance, or lease of village-owned real property. So real property is real estate, shall require approval by a majority vote of the voters in a village-wide referendum. So kind of took out that lease language. Miami Beach is 9 years, and it gets hairy. We had council that represented Smith and Walensky. He was on our ad hoc committee. He gave us some background on having to go and get the Smith and Walensky lease approved, and that's a tough sell. But I kind of just wanted to leave it just very clear and no ambiguity. But again, if you wanted to, use the rec center for a party, that's a use agreement. You want to, close a street to have a block party, that's a license agreement or a use agreement. It's not a lease agreement where the village would be giving another party interest in the land where the event is being held. So there are other ways to take care of that, but I just wanted to make it clear that a lease would be another mechanism that could be used instead of a sale. So I was trying to catch everything here, kind of stop that.
I was going to say, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank, you were on that committee too, because that also came to our attention because of the committee work, and thank you for your reference on that. And I feel like I have this love affair with Palmetto Bay's charter, but they also have some language about that on page 5 of 29. And I think that it's, it gives the community some assurance that, their tax dollars and their participation in the community is being upheld. So I'm supportive of whatever language comes out of this.
I mean, if it's a great deal for a sale or a lease, put it to the voters of the village, and if the residents agree, then so be it. But I think this put some guardrails, given what's happening in some other communities in South Florida. I think it makes sense, since we're looking at the charter, it makes sense to include something like this.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think this is a great idea. I totally support it. Just curious how this actually works. So would it need to be voted on? Are we talking about we have a public vote and then negotiations take place, or are we talking about voting on, we have this proposal here, and it's very specific with dollar amounts and everything, and that's what we're voting on? Okay, yeah. Interesting.
That's the way they do it in Miami Beach.
And one question I have, I know land is so expensive now, but is there any language that has below a certain value? Because there is an expense to taking something to a vote, and I'm just thinking if they're getting rid of a 5-foot swale or giving the fire department, 5 more feet, and it's a $20,000 sale. Would that need to go to the vote, or could there be a threshold that if it's,
And there are, well, I guess there's no reason not to take it to a vote. There are a couple of instances that I can think of where the village may want to partner with, say that, like, for example, in the case of the museum, the Perez Museum in downtown Miami, that's on a lease. That's a 99-year lease. The city of Miami, commission obviously wanted to have those museums. It was a great enhancement to them, but they didn't have to take them to the voters, and taking to the voters, and those are both nonprofit agencies that are spending all their money on providing those facilities. To have to underwrite another $1 million or $2 million to hold an election in the city of Miami would have been a substantial burden. So that was one example. The other is that cities are often provided with some additional revenue opportunities, for example, from wireless infrastructure builders. They like to use the rooftops, or do things, have leases of subleases of city property that don't change the use of the property, but are just an additional use on the property.
But just to jump on that, in Miami Beach, I have some buildings in Miami Beach that are owned by the Housing Authority, government entity, and we have rooftop antenna agreements, but they're not lease agreements. We have license agreements, so we don't give them an interest in the property itself. So there's ways to do it without getting into the lease, but I understand what you're saying.
No, just for that kind of, for an antenna, it's not an issue. I know that the city leases a rooftop of the Anchor Garage to a telecom provider that it contains the hub of the network for them. They have a lot of activity. But yes, that lease is less than 10 years, so it didn't require to go to the voters. But if you have it for any lease of any length, it might have had to go to the voters.
How would this proposal affect the lease of the country club? I believe now it's on a 5-year rotational basis of some sort, right? Am I correct in that?
Isn't it a management agreement, not a lease agreement?
It's on? Yeah, it's a management agreement.
So it's not considered a lease. So this wouldn't affect that at all.
We own the.
Just the sale of the country
Right.
club.
We do, and there are provisions that it cannot be sold.
Well,
In the charter?
my understanding is that it was originally donated to the village, and the agreement is like if we use it for anything else other than a golf course, it goes back to the original owners or their heirs or whatever. So
That's what I've heard, but I'm not sure anybody's ever seen that.
like Grandin Park?
You have?
I've seen it.
Okay. And what does it say?
Don't recall. I specifically about it, reverting, but it specifically says it's not for sale. Cannot be sold.
Possible to get a copy of that?
but if we don't maintain it as a golf course, we lose it.
It's a reverter clause.
I'm not a lawyer, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
Neither am I, but I'm involved in development. Until such time you go to the entity that gave you that property and that covenant and you negotiate an exit with them. Similar to what was happening at the rec center, where the rec center, when they were doing the bond referendum, the village needed to go to the family that had donated it to the village in order to get an agreement to fix some language there because it wasn't going to be allowed to have non-resident use at the rec center. So there's ways to fix these things, but something in the charter would stop it wholesale.
So the way it is now, essentially somebody from the village could go to whatever family it was and negotiate with them to change it from a golf course use.
Well, if
The
we, if
charter
I,
language would prevent that or prevent it from being sold.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, if we're specifically talking about the golf course,
It's hard
there
to-
is, I'm sorry,
It's difficult to understand you.
can you hear me now?
A little better.
Okay, so if we're specifically referencing the golf course, there is language in the Miami-Dade County, that in Miami-Dade County Code that's applicable to parks. And I know there was reference that the golf course is not considered a park, but there is language in the, in Article 7 of Miami-Dade County Code that does cover golf course property in terms of sale and lease of it. And so there are some parameters. So I don't want to leave the impression that there aren't any
Shanae,
parameters.
Shanae, I hate to interrupt, but it's very hard hearing you.
IT, can you help? Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay, I was just specifying because I did not want it to appear that there was no parameters regarding the golf course property. And as far as it being considered a park use, there is language in Miami-Dade County Code that would be applicable regardless if there is a charter provision or not. So I just wanted to make that clear that you all are aware that there are other regulations that will be in play as well.
Mr.
So
Chair,
the county would consider it park space, or is that what you're saying? Couldn't quite get it.
Yeah, so there's a county code provision on the sale of county parks and things of that nature, public parks. And particularly in that provision, it does reference golf courses. So there are parameters around the golf course, in addition to the agreement that's in place, in addition to the code, the Miami-Dade County Code. And if you want to add more constraints in your charter, you very much so can do that as well. But I just wanted to give you more of a framework so you didn't have the impression that there was that it was only the agreement that will be governing in this regard.
Is ours considered a public golf course? Because I think that language with the county applies to the public golf courses.
I think it's open to the public, but I think.
It's considered a public
I
golf
think it's
course.
public now. It used
It's
to
a
be private.
public golf course, and the language, our office has reviewed this language with along with the manager's office. So it's applicable. It is
Well,
applicable.
we've just seen Mel Reese or International Links go through that whole thing, and it didn't seem to stop anything. So,
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different things about the golf course ownership and then, leading back. It seems to be very complex. I think if our goal in putting something in the charter is to require the sale of municipal properties to go to a referendum, and obviously for the Village of Miami Shores, the country club's a big factor. We would want to, from a legal perspective, make sure that whatever we're going to draft for the charter regarding this issue would cover the country club, the golf course. So we need to be real clear on the ownerships and their rights, as you raised, of someone going back to the original owners and working on a new deal with them. See,
well, it's owned. I don't want to focus just strictly on the golf course, but that's, we hear the country club and the golf course every once in a while. Somebody brings up, a potential sale of a portion, residential development on the golf course. We've heard that, but we've also heard selling this building, the 9900 building, selling the public works land that's west of the village boundaries. And we've heard different scenarios, and if the scenario is good, like in Miami Beach, you come up with a plan, you say what the parameters of the deal are, and it goes to the residents to vote on. And in Miami Beach, a number of them have passed. Smith & Wollensky lease for one prime waterfront property to have a restaurant, it passed. Lincoln Lane, they wanted to take the parking lots, we're talking about parking lots, take the parking lots and develop offices and commercial and some apartments there. It failed. Increasing FAR on Collins Avenue in the Deauville Hotel, that failed. So, but there are times where it passes, but the residents, I think the residents should have the right to look at the deal and give an up or a down. And some of those deals I thought I'd be up and some I'd be down, but at least the residents have a say. And, but it's not just, you know, Bill, it's not just the golf course and the country club, but that was, you know, the push for me to put that there. But it's this 9900 building. The minute the village bought it, people wanted to sell it. So if the village owns it, the village owns it. They own the police station. We shouldn't be selling stuff. We shouldn't be selling the, you know, the parking lots, you know, that are the buffers now. We shouldn't be selling those things for development unless the residents say that that's the best thing. So I'll
Mr. Chair.
make the motion to include that language. Just leave it at that. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I agree. I think even if this has no effect on the golf course, it's super important. I think if we are interested in maintaining the golf course, we might have to, you know, there might be something else that has to get done, whether that's up to us or not. But I think the next question is, what leases do we currently have and that would be affected by this, if any? Do we have? Are there any leases going on currently that this would affect, that would fall under this, just to give us like an idea of what the effects are?
At this time, there are no leases.
Okay.
Correct. Great.
Mr. Scott, you had a comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just didn't want, just to address Mr. Griffith, I didn't want to come across as being flippant or my response not having any teeth. What I was really saying was that when I read that covenant some time ago as a new manager, I just wanted to know a few things, particularly as it pertained to the country club and the current management agreement, was that I ran across a document, which is a covenant in fact, and it was made very clear in that a decision could not be made by a majority of the sitting body to sell that land. So I just want to be a little clearer in what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And the agreement is a management agreement. It's not a lease agreement.
As it is right now with the country club, it's a management agreement. Yes.
Now, to most operators want to work under a management agreement or a lease agreement? I mean, if most want to, if in the future you have to go to somebody else and they're looking for a lease agreement, then under this, it would have to go before a vote.
You mean the current management agreement?
Right, I'm saying to most golf course operators that lease or manage properties, are they looking for a management agreement or are they looking for a lease agreement?
It varies. One thing I know for sure is that most municipalities would not want to undertake the day-to-day grind of operating a golf course and a country club. They'd rather get some sort of agreement with a management company to do that. It's very expensive for a municipality to run a country club.
I think what Mr. Griffith is asking, which I think is a good question, is we had trouble finding management recently for the golf course. And if it was an option to lease the golf course, would that have been like, would we have more people knocking on the door to say, hey, we want to manage this place if you're leasing it to us?
I have not done any cost benefit analysis on that.
Was the prior agreement before this one, was that a lease or was that a management?
It was a management agreement as well.
It's been a
Yes.
management agreement for the last 30 years.
From what I've seen, correct.
All right, thank you.
But there's one in place that came about as a result of COVID, and that is still in effect.
I think, to move things along, I think my take on it is that we feel like this is an important issue that we want to take a hard look at putting into the charter. I think from my perspective, because we have a pretty good idea of what properties are going to be the most significant property, but so then we want to make sure that what we write actually gets us the protection that we want. So I don't know whether that goes back to, to village council to, I don't know whether it would be a opinion letter or, you know, I don't know how familiar you all are. I think Ms. Wood, since you may be familiar, how familiar you are with all the nuances of the ownership and covenants and everything else going with the country club, or even if there's something maybe with the Western Public Works property. I think we need to have somebody with real estate law experience that can come in and tell us, you know, yes, I know what the ownership is here, I know what the ownership is there, and if the goal of the charter is to require whether it's 50% or 60, 51% or 60% vote of the residents before that could be sold, we want to make sure we've got all of the legal issues buttoned up. So, I don't know.
But the village knows what it owns.
Yeah.
So
We know the
so
ownership.
that we can get that, and how, and you know, what the ownership is and what the covenants might be and everything else.
But the covenants would have no bearing on the ownership. The ownership is the ownership. Covenant would, you know, determine uses and things of that sort. But the ownership is the ownership. All this is saying is, if the village wants to sell it, gotta go to the residents. If you want to convey it in any way, shape, or form to another entity, the residents have to weigh in.
So you're saying as long as the issue to be established is what's the ownership of the village? And if they own it, then that's all you need to know.
That's all you need to know.
I just think we need to find the language for this. I think we're all in support. This is a dumb question, but we're on those election thresholds. I assume they mean like if it's 60%, that's 60% of those people who voted or 60% of the eligible voters?
Probably if who voted.
Okay.
You know, when it's put out there, yeah.
Yeah,
Put out
okay.
there, you gotta get out. And
Okay.
I mean,
make sure.
in Miami Beach.
Typically, turnout is about 20%.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're
It's low.
requiring 60% of eligible voters would be,
You never sell anything.
Yeah.
But in Miami Beach, some sales and leases only require a majority, so that's 50% plus one.
Plus one.
Some of them, around the convention center, it's 60% to sell or to lease it. So they put a mega threshold on it, basically make it crystal clear that's not gonna happen. But I didn't want to weigh it down, I just wanted to make it.
So so how do we get, where are we gonna go with some language? We've got the language you put forth, Michael. We've got Surfside, Madeira, City of Largo. And then there's some different things about what you can lease for a certain period. How do we want to tackle that? Do we?
I think that, you know, the manager did let us know that there are no leases in place, so it doesn't affect anything. And there are, you know, legal remedies to, you know, through use agreements and license agreements to, you know, for shorter periods of time without providing the interest in the property itself. So I think there are other legal mechanisms to achieve using things for, you know, for monetary purposes.
I think the proposed language only deals with disposing of surplus property, rather than like what you're saying, which is different from using, temporary use of property.
Right.
So is that the proposed language
At
that?
the very bottom, is the kind of the
Is what we have.
yeah, the very bottom three lines
Right.
is the vanilla kind of
So you want to keep it simple, or would you want more teeth in it?
I think it just spells it out.
At the
Just
bottom, the
at
proposed language,
bottom,
right.
Yeah, so I don't want to get into telling the manager when he has a clunker in Public Works, how he has to dispose of that, or a television, or
No,
something
no,
like
no.
that. That I don't
That's
want to
personal
get
property, right.
involved, but it's real property
Right.
is real estate. I'm okay if, you know, if the village attorney wants to weigh in a little bit more and do some more research on and provide some sample language, I'm okay with that. Or I'm okay adopting that. I'll defer to the village attorney.
And before you do, Village Attorney, I just want to make sure that it doesn't come off as a very absolute statement when I said there are no, when I said, I should say I'm not aware of any leases that's going on now, because there may have been something that happened 30 years ago that I'm not privy to, but I'm not aware of any.
At the moment.
Yes, at the moment, correct.
Okay.
So why don't we go with my thought, that language there in the bottom, start with that, have the village attorney tell us whether, you know, you're gonna need a few more bells and whistles, you know, to make it, you know, more solid, not adding a whole lot of stuff, but just maybe some language if needed. Is everybody here good with the majority vote?
You use the example of Miami Beach around the convention center, so certain properties you would outline the fine clearly and say 60%, and otherwise 50%.
I mean, the beach is unique because it has some really, I mean, I don't know that we have that many shining stars here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't want to try and
It would be
say
a
that
little more
one
simple, I
piece
think.
of property was more important than another.
Right.
Right.
They should all be treated the same. Because they're dealing with waterfront property, oceanfront, things, you know, of that nature. But whatever, I'm okay, if somebody wants to go higher than a majority, I'm good with that too. To me, it doesn't matter, it's just that the principle is the thing for me.
All right, so is there a motion
I made the motion.
to have them
To direct.
to
village
work off of
attorney
that
to-
language
yeah, to
there?
come back with some sample language for us to consider at the next meeting? Does that make sense?
Well,
It sounds like everybody's satisfied with this language.
Right.
I would, the only suggestion I would make is that even Miami Beach, which has about the most restrictive charter provision of any municipality in terms of leases, specifies leases of over a certain length. The shorter term leases are not required to go to the voters. That's the only thing that, you know, which I had suggested earlier, and if that's not the will of the committee, then, you know, that's fine, but that would be the only thing that I would say that really need to consider, is whether any lease of any length needs to be voter approved.
I would think there would be some kind of a time limit on a lease that we could write in there, minimum or.
Mhm. As long as you couldn't, if it was, let's just make it up 5 months, you couldn't just have consecutive 5-month leases.
No, and it's interesting, because Miami Beach's provisions do address that specifically, leases 10 years, including all renewals.
so for a maximum of 10 years, for example?
Yeah.
Okay,
That there would be no, and that's theirs.
right.
Yours could be 3 years or 11 years, you know, there's no magic number, but theirs was very restrictive, but it's still a lease of under 10 years didn't require voter approval there.
Is there a scenario that you can come up with, not necessarily the committee, is there a scenario that we can come up with where you wouldn't want the residents to weigh in?
Or small, let's just say that properties that maybe are outside our village limits, they're actually assets to us, and it's in idle, and drive revenue now, so they're waiting, I don't know when a vote would actually take place, to help us better financially.
Well, if you want, I mean, I kind of know where, you know, if you're talking about the, you know, the public works property, then maybe you do two, I'm just throwing this out, 2 questions. The first question is, within real property within the village limits. And then another question outside of the village limits. So if somebody wants, so if the residents feel that they want to, you know, give the council the ability to, you know, look at leases on the, you know, the west property, then that's fine. But I think you need to be clear, maybe 2 questions deal with that rather than just one. I don't know.
There's also,
I would say just any village on
Yeah, I
property. To your point about when would we not want it, what's sticking in my mind is the lease question, where let's say there's something, you know, where it's a short-term, very short-term lease, that's, you know, good for the village, whether it's financially or the residents, where you wouldn't want to have to go through a whole election to allow, you know, a short-term lease and something like that.
There's lawyers in the room. You go a license agreement, you go use agreement. There's other ways to skin the cat on something like that, but it would be shorter. It'd be a shorter term.
Yeah.
So if you're this is more geared towards, you know, you want to lease you want to lease the police station for a restaurant for 10 years. That's this. If somebody wants to, you know, use the basketball court as, you know, a permanent pickleball facility or a semi-permanent for 6 months, that's a use agreement. That's not a lease agreement because they're not transferring the rights of the property.
There's another scenario, and it might never come up, but I know in some of the cities I represent, they've bought property before just to take it out of the hands of developers because they were afraid of what would be developed there. But they intend to dispose of it eventually in a way that will lead to some kind of development that they want. That scenario, I don't know how to exempt that, but that may be something that you want to exempt so that the village isn't deterred from acquiring property.
If it's a good deal to acquire, then put it to the residents to sell it. Let the residents say. And you know, the Miami Beach model, a lot of people hate it, but it works. Give the residents the voice, and that's where it ends. And if they say yes, great. If they say no, great.
All right, so I think that there's a motion from Michael to have council, you know, using the simple provision on the bottom there under disposal of village property, using that, and currently going with the majority vote to put it in more legalese if it's necessary, bring it back next week, and we'll make a decision on it.
Does this address purchase of property
I was just going
at
to
all?
ask that.
No, this
I
would
was
only
just going to
address
ask that.
disposal.
Should we have
Did we
something that?
address the purchase of property?
We talked about that sorry, Mr. Chair. We talked about that at the ad hoc committee, that didn't want, if there's a piece of property, I'm on 93rd, and there was that abandoned house that was for sale. I don't know if everybody knows where the artwork used to be on Northeast 2nd and 93rd. There used to be a house there. And the village went in and bought the house, tore it down, and now it's a park. So I wouldn't want to have that happened very quickly. It was an auction, you had to put up money, all those things. I wouldn't want the village for something like that to have to go through a whole referendum to purchase.
Well, the other thing, your negotiation to get a good price is out the window once you go on public record to say, oh, we want to buy this property. I
wouldn't
think.
want to tie their hands in the purchase, because to me that was a great purchase. You know, because they weren't purchasing the house to use as a house. There was a bigger picture to expand parkland. I think if opportunities are there, I think on a purchase, I'd have full faith in the council. But on the sale of a village asset, I think everybody should have the ability to weigh in.
Well, should we make a statement about purchasing? I mean, not that we want to tie their hands, but, you know, the money that the village spends is public money. It's village money, right? And so even if we don't tie their hands, I think there should be something that states, you know, that they can purchase and whatever, however we want to word it.
I'd be curious to see how Coral Gables does, because they bought several lots. They purchased several lots that they just turned into like street parks. Different.
I mean, to not say anything doesn't seem right. How do other municipalities deal with the purchase of property? Do they say it in their charter, or there's?
Ones that I represent don't have specific terms in there.
You don't?
For purchase of property. The Florida law gives, obviously, Florida law gives municipalities the ability to purchase property. You know, clearly, if it something that requires a bond issue and a general obligation bond, that's going to go to the voters.
Right.
If it's a small purchase, it wouldn't require that. But Cutler Bay, we just got a $30 million bond issue passed pretty much to develop one park, to purchase, develop one property.
Okay.
Cutler Bay's been very active in trying to take available property out of the market so that they don't have more density there.
Mhm. So most municipalities, let me just understand, don't cover purchase. They do cover
No.
disposal of a surplus.
Some do, yeah.
Okay.
Some require voter approval, as we've been discussing, but for disposal of
Okay, so
property.
we've got motion. Is there a second for Michael's motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes.
Could we just also just request that we verify that this doesn't affect anything that's currently, any current leases? We didn't get a really like a solid definite answer on that, maybe,
I really think that you can't, you
This
can't,
wouldn't affect anything retroactively.
you can't, it would be an impairment of contract if it
Got it.
affected
Are
a
there
lease that was
any-
already in effect.
Not only that, there are no time limits. You're just,
I was saying like if there's any current leases
Yeah,
that we
to
have going
confirm
on
whether
right now.
there are or
Oh,
are not.
okay.
But even if there are, it sounds like you
Got it,
couldn't
right.
pass something that would
Couldn't
retroactively.
invalidate an existing contract.
No, we don't think there's any current leases. Are there any
Right.
current negotiations to sell property at this time that we know of?
There are no current negotiations, no, that I'm aware of.
A lot of whispers and rumors.
All right, so
okay.
the next question, it's
Mr. Chair, if I can just get clarification from my understanding, was the vote to vote on this proposed language and as in any amendments that our office sees so fit? Is that the direction?
are you talking about what was just, the motion that was just passed?
Yeah, yes, I just wanted clarification. What were you all voting on the proposed language from Mr. O'Hara? I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, we were voting on that for council to use that as a basis to
Okay.
to give us some proposed language next time that, has maybe, if needed, any more legalese or whatnot. And then,
Okay,
so once we get
And-
that language, we'll address this again next week to try to make a final decision on it.
okay, and that was just for the sale, not purchase, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Sale
Okay.
only, yes.
Thank
Sale,
you.
exchange, conveyance, or lease.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we moved on from that. It's, I was going to say it's 8:25. Do we want to get some background on neighborhood protection or just leave that to start next week?
You probably should just hit it and get out.
What's that?
You probably should just hit it and get out. You
Yeah,
know,
so-
let's finish it.
So at least get the background on it, okay?
If you like, Mitch, I could jump in on this one. So,
It's been difficult to hear you. I don't know if you can speak closer to the microphone, if that would make it less muffled, but it's coming out very muffled here.
well, then I'll be quiet then. I don't want to take up much time. I'll pass it over to you all.
Do you want to hear from us then?
Yeah,
Yes.
if you don't mind. I mean, we've got this sample language in here.
Yeah, the closest that we could find was this Palmetto Bay language. You'll see that in the Palmetto Bay language, the first part is very vague and I think not easily enforceable, but there's a part, you look at the second provision, 10.2.2, it requires a higher vote of the council, a supermajority of the council, to approve a zoning change, conditional use, special exception in any single-family residential district. So other than that, I mean, the language in 10.2.1 is feel-good language, but it doesn't really create any additional obligation on the part of the council in terms of that. Most of the time, you address these things in your comprehensive plan in a way that protects single-family neighborhoods and, you know, other neighborhoods. So I think that at best, the Palmetto Bay provision creates the expectation that they're going to address that through the planning process, but doesn't have any specific requirements other than in 10.2.2.1, which does create a supermajority vote for the upzoning of properties or special exceptions of properties in the single-family member district, single-family home district.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may. So so I made this request, and I mean, I hate to say, I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping we would get some more stuff back. I asked about this neighborhood protection that's in the Palmetto Bay Charter, and after doing a little more research into it, yes, this doesn't really seem to have any teeth. It's feel-good language. What happened with this is a year or two after, I believe, they formed a committee based on this section of the charter. That committee came up with a bunch of recommendations on ordinances that would actually put some teeth on this, and a lot of those got approved. I'm here to put teeth on stuff. So if this doesn't do anything, I'm not interested in it. This other example you gave here, do you want to talk about this at all?
Melbourne, that one?
Melbourne.
The Melbourne? Do you have any?
Yeah, again, it's not very,
Of course.
they're not very specific.
So
But
I
this
guess
is
what I was hoping
the
for is you
Melbourne,
guys would come
I'm
back.
sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to clarify that the Melbourne example is not a charter provision. That's a comp plan
That's comp plan.
provision.
It's
part of their
comp
comp plan.
It's a comp plan.
Is it still too muffled for me? Can you guys hear me at all?
Yes, we can hear you. Go
It's
ahead.
good now.
Okay, and just to clarify in terms of what we brought back, there wasn't much to bring back in terms of samples. And I know that we have talked about in the past, like things that are particular to certain municipalities. This particular provision for Palmetto Bay, they seem to take it a little bit more seriously. And as you already indicated, they have a whole separate code of ordinances, a committee that is set out for it. And so it's something that I think is a little particular to this community. And that's why we didn't see it as often in other charters. Where we did see it, where it was in various comprehensive plans, as Mitch pointed out. And so opposed to just, overburdening you with more comprehensive plans items than what you already have to read outside of this. And then in addition to your materials, we just wanted to provide you with that update. So as you discuss this, you can draft something that's particular to Miami Shores. But in terms of providing several samples, it's just not as many available.
Sure.
Wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's fine. So I guess what I was hoping is we could get, what are the bounds that we can play in here when it comes to this charter? I think it's obvious what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish here is provide, we have a lot of, the village is very heated right now. We have this comp plan, it's very divisive, a lot of people are worked up about it. And I want to know if there's anything that we could do to address it. So when I look up this stuff here, I see a relevant statute and law comes up, Florida statute. It says, an initiative or referendum process in regard to any development order is prohibited. Okay. What is a development order?
A development order is a decision of the council that permits a particular development on a particular property. So it's a particular application. So somebody comes in with an application, says, I need to I want to build a hotel, a 12-story hotel on 2nd Avenue. And right now, it's not zoned for hotels, and the maximum building height is 4 stories. So the development order would include the rezoning and the change in floor area ratio and all of the differences that are applicable to that particular property that would be necessary to approve that development. That's a development order. So you can't then, the people wouldn't be able to do an initiative or referendum to undo that.
Okay, but could we have a referendum saying no hotels?
You could have a referendum. Yeah, I mean, you could have you could, in fact, right now, there's a proposal in Pinecrest, one of the towns that I represent, that seeks to amend the charter to require voter approval anytime to rezone or upzone any property to allow for a hotel.
Okay, yeah, so I'm just trying to see like, where is that line? You know, how far can we go? Like, can our charter say that this is going to be a majority single-family homeowner municipality? Are we over the line?
I'm not sure how you could, that you would need more specificity than just to say that, but yeah, I understand.
My concern, it seems like the specifics are where you start to run into trouble, where now you're starting to limit specific things, and that might not be allowed to go on a referendum.
Right.
Please.
Jesse, we talked last meeting. One thing that I brought up along this neighborhood protection idea is limiting height. So that's what I asked the council at the last meeting, and it was confirmed that we could, that the charter could include language that had height limitations that would trump what would be in the comprehensive plan. So that, to me, was that's what I thought you were talking about with the neighborhood protection, meaning height. So I think, I know we're getting a little bit late, but I think that's something maybe the village attorney can come back with some examples. I was looking at this and the question that I had last time, because I was confused on whether or not you could do that, because I saw that limitation on development orders. The development order really is coming from like the Historic Preservation Board, the Planning and Zoning Board. But Mount Dora did a height limitation recently. There's other municipalities that have done heights and have included that language in the charter. So
how about density? Can we touch density?
You could limit changes. Well, if you look at the Miami Beach Code, which those provisions, they have provisions that require voter approval for certain code changes that would increase height or density.
But in Miami Beach, a height change and not an FAR change can be done by the council.
Right.
So I think that's kind of, you're saying no changes. So if you put that in the charter, that if just thrown out, if it was a 35-foot limit or a 40-foot limit, 3 or 4 stories, that would be all you could get up to.
You had asked originally about protecting single-family neighborhoods and language that specifically protects single-family neighborhoods. And so that's where we started with that. But if you want to see other provisions that limit the other growth management limits.
I think that maybe that's the topic instead of its neighborhood protection, it's growth management protection.
Okay.
Or something along that.
I'm trying to like skirt the line here. I don't want to get into like, I don't want to turn this into a zoning board and we're trying to get into the nitty-gritty details and stuff. If there was just something broad we can come up with.
There are loads of charters have height. You Google Florida charter development, you'll come up with pages. You'll have to go through them. I spent hours going through and seeing, and not all of them passed. In some municipalities, it was, worded in such a way, but other charters have included that language or have at least attempted
Sure,
to have the residents weigh.
and that's really what this is about. I hear a lot of talk from people saying, why aren't we voting on this? Why aren't we, so if we could get something to the voters and let them have their say and actually vote on something that would put some guide rails or something on it, then it would be, nothing else for anybody to say, the people have spoken. But at the same time, there seems to be some barriers to doing that in the state statute. So that's what I'm trying to navigate here. That sounds like a great avenue to explore.
If I
So-
could through the chair, though, I mean, Jesse, I admire direction you're taking this because, amid all the controversy, and I'm not taking a position here, nor should I think this committee take a position on the comp plan because of our bailiwick, but I find it fascinating that every little nuance change that we have to do for the charter has to go for voter approval, yet other very big actions don't go to the voters. So, I mean, I'm actually very happy to serve on this committee for that reason, because at the end of the day, it's not us who's going to have the final say-so in anything we do.
I totally agree, yeah. Well, really, all we're doing is making stuff to present to the voters for them to decide on. That's great.
We have no say in the matter.
Yep.
So where are we on the neighborhood protection issue?
I think you'd like to see more examples.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? Why do you think 10.2.1 have any teeth or whatever?
Well, it contains, really, it contains the things that, it's sort of a description of desirable development, but it doesn't obligate the council to do anything specific or require any higher number of votes for anything in particular. And one thing that, I mean, if you wanted to make things more, if you wanted to have more vetting and, without necessarily having to have an election every time there's a need to upzone property, you might have intermediate type provisions which require it to go, say, through I don't know, does the village have a separate citizen planning board?
Yes.
Planning review board? So a higher number of votes at the planning review board level, followed by a higher number of votes at the council level, something along those lines.
But a development order, like the site plan approval or things like that, that wouldn't go to the council. That would stay strictly at the planning and zoning.
So you could require where such an approval would have a bigger effect, I can't think of an example right now, but something that.
Because the language in 10.2.1 is all opinion. And it's just selling that to the board, and you're gonna sell it to the planning and zoning board. I sell low-income housing next to $1 million homes, and you just have to sell it and get approved. There's a benefit there, but it's all a matter of opinion in the way that's written. A lot of times.
So is there something concrete that we can say, well, this direction, that direction, heard a lot about height. I think you have an idea of what we're trying to protect.
Growth management protections, I think, is maybe the better title for the discussion, and see if there's any ideas that you can come up with.
And we'll try to find a few examples of heightened voting requirements at the council level, and then a few examples where voter approval is required.
I don't think we need a motion for that. I think just a direction.
We have the sense of this, we have the sense of this committee as to what you need from us.
I kind of like the idea of a supermajority of council. You're going to have supermajority of council vote.
Yeah, even for the planning and zoning board, I'm a member on that, and in Miami Beach, you need 5/7 in order to approve a variance. In Miami Shores, you just need a majority. So, there's a higher threshold, and I think, on some of these things, we need to get to the higher threshold limit. Not because we're not trusting, I think we're all very trusting people, but I think just when certain things come about, you want a super majority of people to make that call.
I can also remember, this is 30 years post, so things have changed and ideas have changed, architecture has changed, and so it'd be nice. I agree.
So before we adjourn, we typically increased our list of things to go over at the end of our meeting, and I think we've gotten through or made progress on a lot of these. So again, I'm looking at the municipal charter outline that Ms. Wood had given us the first meeting, and this is not it's meant for specifics, but just basically areas for us to look at. And in one of the areas, it says, if you have that sheet article, it just reference Article 6, Charter Amendments. I've been meaning to ask, I believe we're going to address, and I think the ad hoc advisory committee suggested 10 years, but basically put something in the charter that says that I don't know whether it was going in the ordinance, I think it was going to go into the charter, that says that there will be a charter review committee every 10 years. Because right now, it doesn't say anything. There's no requirement to have a charter review committee. And of course, as we all know, it's been a long time since this charter's been reviewed, but the idea was, and I think the council had adopted that, or recommended that, but when do we get into putting that into, I guess we could put it on the list to talk about. It was suggested 10 years, but again, the council can do it whenever they want to, so they don't have to wait 10 years. But what it does, it just keeps it on the radar for every 10 years at least. And I think that was somewhat consistent with the other charters we saw.
You could
Some
say,
had 5, some had 10.
you could say no more than 10
I
years,
would just say-
not to exceed
yeah, I would
10
just say
years.
10.
And if you want to, I'll gladly move that now, because that sounds like a simple one we could knock off tonight. So I'll move that we add language that the charter is reviewed minimally once every 10 years.
Is there a second?
Second.
10 years seems like a long time. 10 years seems like a long time. I just want to flesh that out.
Okay,
10
so
years
here's-
versus 5.
I'll give you some of the thought process,
Okay.
just so you kind of know. So it was clear that if there was something that came up on the radar, it says like, this needs to be addressed in our charter, that the council can do it whenever they want, so it's not restricted to 10 years.
Okay.
And then the other, so we felt like, okay, so you're not waiting 10 years. The reason that 10 years kind of ended up, kind of the number, was because we felt that this charter hasn't been reviewed in a long time, so there's work to be done, at least to review it and think through it. But once you get your charter up to speed, you don't really, it doesn't change like ordinances. If you've got, some particular issue that needs to be addressed, it's typically handled by an ordinance. And so the charter, which is often, looked at as our constitution, doesn't need, to be addressed that often, but it should be something, so it's on your radar. That was the thought process. But some charters have 5 years. So
I like the idea, Michael, of no more than 10 years. Not to exceed 10 years, rather, yeah.
I don't know if that was second, but.
Yes, it was.
Second.
Mr. LaCoffey?
yeah,
And second, yes.
okay. And so the amended and second is that using language no more than 10 years. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No, you oppose?
Mr. Chairman, there was one, we went through, from the ad hoc, there were 6 recommendations. We went through 5 of them already. There was just one that we haven't touched on, so if we could talk about it maybe at the next meeting, was expanding the administration section, that we didn't have all of the charter officers listed in the charter. So if we could talk about that at the next meeting. That was the last one from the ad hoc committee.
So we're gonna add to our list, in this little outline, it's referenced as administration.
Article 3?
Look at the administration section, which has to do with the village manager, village attorney, village clerk, and some charters have more detail in terms of what their duties are. So I don't know if you guys want to end up giving us a little report on, here's kind of what others have, here's what you guys have. It doesn't have to be in a lot of detail, but just kind of give us a starting point that where Miami Shores is in connection with some of the other like-sized communities. Anything else that you want to add to our list?
Well, we already have prohibitions, growth management. You said the administration, then I think we're bringing back more on the Bill of Rights.
Yeah. Think that'll keep us busy?
Thanks.
Well, and then we've covered everything from the advisory committee,
Yes,
right?
that would be the last one.
Okay, so we're gonna add administration on there, and then you say that the ones that are coming back with more information, we'll tackle those as well. Right.
Before we leave, did we want to open up one last chance for public comment?
We could.
If necessary, if anybody wants.
Is there anyone here that
Second.
would like to provide some public comment?
I just wanted to make a comment about.
I think you need to come up here. I know, but you don't need a microphone, but just can you give your name and address, so it's 4 minutes.
I'm a teacher, I'm a former teacher up in Georgia.
I can hear you great.
Yeah,
So Patricia Spread on the 246 Northeast 100th Street. This is just an observation from sitting back here. We could hear the young lady speaking very clearly through these speakers, but you couldn't hear anything. So just for your future reference, maybe when they turn the speaker, you could hear her well. So just to let you know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of your work. I'm very impressed. I wasn't able to make the first meeting, or I was out of town. But thank you for all of the work, and I agree with quite a bit of what you all said, so I'm very happy.
Thank you.
thank you. All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Lee,
Aye.
all those in favor, just head to the door.
Okay. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, guys.
So,